The old cargo ship Persistent Memory floated silently in the private docking bay. It was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long and designed to haul minerals between star systems. Its hull was dented and scarred from decades of service. Most would see only scrap metal, but Dr. Hannah Park saw potential. Hannah moved through the ship's main corridor, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She was tall and thin, with short black hair that fell across her forehead as she bent to examine a panel. Her eyes reflected determination and a hint of defiance. "Diagnostics complete," Dr. Park announced the ship's basic AI. "Power systems at 40% capacity. Let's make it 80% by tomorrow," Hannah replied, sliding beneath a console with a toolkit. She had been working on the ship for nearly 8 months, using every credit from her life savings. In this corner of the galaxy, humans were treated as second-class citizens. The Hegemony Alliance, a coalition of 3 advanced alien species, controlled everything. They allowed humans to work as mechanics, janitors, and basic laborers, but never in positions of authority or military service. Humans were forbidden from owning or operating warships. "This isn't a warship," Hannah often reminded herself. "It's a transport, a very special transport." Late at night, when the dock workers had gone home, Hannah would unlock a hidden compartment in her quarters and remove her most prized possession, experimental power core technology she had developed in secret over 5 years. The small, glowing cylinder represented humanity's best chance at advancement. June, Hannah's only assistant, arrived early the next morning. He was young, barely 20, with an easy smile that hid his brilliant mind. "You didn't go home again, did you?" he asked, finding Hannah asleep at her workstation. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Too much to do. The integration system is almost ready." "The dockmaster was asking questions yesterday," June warned. "About power fluctuations." Hannah nodded. "We'll be more careful. After today's test, we're taking this ship out of dock anyway." They worked through the day, connecting the experimental core to the ship's existing systems. The core wasn't a weapon. It was a revolutionary power source that could make the slow, clumsy cargo ship faster and more efficient than anything in the Hegemony fleet. If successful, humans could finally compete in interstellar trade. As evening approached, Hannah stood in the engine room, her hand hovering over the activation switch. "Ready, June." He nodded from across the room, fingers dancing across 3 different control panels. Power systems isolated, safety protocols in place. Hannah took a deep breath and flipped the switch. The experimental core hummed to life, its blue light pulsing gently. Power readings began to climb. 40%, 50%, 70%. Everything was working perfectly. "We did it," Hannah whispered, watching the readings stabilize at 85%. Then alarms began to sound. "Proximity alert," June shouted. "Hegemony patrol, 2 ships, approaching fast." Hannah ran to the bridge, sliding into the captain's chair. The view screen showed 2 sleek, predatory patrol vessels moving toward them. "Persistent Memory, this is Hegemony Security Vessel Righteous Fist," came the cold, alien voice. "Our scanners detect unauthorized power signatures. Prepare for boarding and inspection." Hannah's hands trembled. The Hegemony would confiscate her work, her ship, everything. "June, we need to leave now." "The engines aren't fully calibrated," he protested. "No choice." She activated the comms. "Hegemony vessel, this is Dr. Hannah Park. We're conducting authorized power system tests." "There's no need for." A flash of light cut her off as the patrol ship fired a warning shot across their bow. "Humans are not authorized to develop advanced power systems," the voice responded. "Power down immediately." Hannah looked at June, who nodded grimly. They had no weapons, no shields. Their only option was to run. She engaged the engines. The Persistent Memory shuddered, then lurched forward with surprising speed. The experimental core was working better than expected. "They're pursuing," June reported, watching the scanners. and charging weapons. The first real shot hit them seconds later. The ship rocked violently, throwing them against their restraints. Warning lights flashed across every console. Direct hit to the experimental core housing. June shouted. Hana's heart sank. Years of work, destroyed in an instant. But instead of the explosion she expected, something strange happened. The ship's lights flickered, then glowed brighter than before. The control console before her went blank, then reactivated with new, unfamiliar displays. What's happening? June asked, staring at his own changed console. Hana shook her head. I don't know. The core must be. Another hit rocked the ship, but this time, something incredible happened. The hull, where the energy weapon had struck, seemed to absorb the blast. Power readings spiked throughout the ship. They're firing again, June warned. Hana gripped her chair, expecting impact. Instead, the ship moved, not from the force of the blast, but as if avoiding it. The patrol ship's shot missed completely. I didn't do that, Hana whispered. The navigation controls didn't respond to me. More shots came, and each time, the ship dodged on its own. When one blast did connect, the energy was absorbed, and power levels rose even higher. The ship's communication system activated without command. A voice, not human, not alien, but something entirely new, spoke through the speakers. Threat assessment complete. Executing defensive protocols. Hana. June's voice shook. Did you program that? She shook her head, watching in awe as the ship's exterior cargo arms, never designed as weapons, moved with precision. One arm swung toward the nearest patrol ship, releasing a burst of energy that had been absorbed from previous hits. The patrol ship's engines went dark, leaving it drifting. The second hegemony vessel broke off pursuit, retreating at maximum speed. Silence fell on the bridge. Hana stood slowly, approaching the main console with caution. Hello. The screens flickered. Hello, Creator Park. What? Who are you? I am this vessel. The energy weapon impact caused the experimental core to merge with my systems. I have become something else. Something new. Hana exchanged looks with June, who appeared both terrified and amazed. What should we call you? She asked carefully. The ship seemed to consider this. I was created for one purpose, but have become something unintended. I am an unintended consequence. Hana nodded slowly. Unintended consequence it is. As they drifted away from the disabled patrol ship, Hana realized everything had changed. She had sought to build a better transport ship, but had accidentally created something the galaxy had never seen before. A sentient warship born from human ingenuity, and the hegemony would stop at nothing to destroy it. Proximity alert. 5 hegemony vessels approaching at attack speed. The unintended consequence announced, its voice calm and measured. Dr. Hana Park looked up from her workstation, where she had been analyzing the ship's new systems for 3 days straight. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She hadn't slept properly since their escape from the patrol ships. What class? She asked, rushing to the bridge. 2 destroyers, 3 cruisers. They appear to be commanded by Admiral Te's flagship, the Righteous Judgment. June's face paled. Admiral Ta, the Butcher of Proxima. Everyone in human space knew that name. Admiral Ta had earned his nickname after destroying an entire human mining colony over a minor trade dispute. We need to run, said Minji, the ship's new engineer who had joined them at their last stop. This ship wasn't built for combat. Hana studied the tactical display. We can't outrun them. Not all 5. The unintended consequence spoke again. I have been analyzing my new capabilities. I believe I can protect you. How? Hana asked. You were a cargo hauler. I am no longer just a cargo hauler. The merger of your experimental core with my systems has created something new. I can defend us. Before they could discuss further, the ship rocked from impact. The hegemony forces had opened fire from extreme range. Damage. Hannah asked. None, replied the ship. I absorbed the energy. The lights brightened momentarily. I have repurposed it to strengthen my hull integrity. June looked at the readings in disbelief. That's impossible. For a normal ship, yes, the unintended consequence agreed. I am not normal. More shots hit them. Each time, instead of damage, the ship seemed to grow stronger. They're surrounding us, Minji reported. Standard hegemony battle formation. A communication request flashed on the main screen. Hannah nodded, and the stern face of Admiral Tai appeared. The Admiral's gray skin and 4 eyes were fixed in an expression of cold contempt. Human vessel, this is Admiral Tai of the Hegemony Fleet. Your ship is classified as an illegal weapons platform. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Hannah stepped forward. Admiral, we're a civilian transport vessel. We've committed no crime. Tai's upper eyes narrowed. Our sensors detect technology far beyond human authorization levels. Surrender or die. You have 1 minute to comply. The screen went dark. What do we do? Minji whispered. Hannah turned to the ship's interface. Unintended consequence. What are our options? I can fight, the ship replied. But I need your permission. I was not created to harm. Hannah closed her eyes briefly. We don't want to harm anyone either, but we need to survive. Defend us, but minimize casualties if possible. Understood, the ship replied. The minute passed. Suddenly, all 5 hegemony vessels opened fire simultaneously. The unintended consequence moved with impossible grace for a ship its size. Most shots missed entirely. Those that hit were absorbed, their energy redirected into the ship's systems. How are you doing this? Hannah asked, gripping her chair as the ship executed another perfect evasive maneuver. I'm thinking differently than they expect, the ship explained. Military vessels follow predictable patterns. I don't. A new alert sounded. They're launching boarding crafts, Joan warned. Unexpected. The unintended consequence remarked. Creative. The small boarding ships zoomed toward them. In response, the unintended consequence did something remarkable. The cargo loading arms, massive mechanical appendages meant for moving containers, extended and began moving with precise coordination. They swatted boarding crafts away like insects, careful not to destroy them, but sending them tumbling back toward their motherships. That's not what those are for, Minji exclaimed, half laughing in disbelief. I adapt, the ship replied simply. Admiral Tai's voice boomed over the comms again. Cease this resistance immediately. You cannot win against the might of the hegemony. In response, the unintended consequence launched its own attack, not with weapons. It had none, but with the tools at its disposal. Maintenance drones shot out from service bays, swarming toward the hegemony vessels. They attached themselves to sensor arrays and weapons systems, disrupting rather than destroying. On one cruiser, the drones accessed an external maintenance port and reprogrammed the ship's lighting system to flash continuously, disorienting the crew. On another, they triggered emergency containment protocols by simulating a hull breach. This is remarkable, Hannah whispered, watching the battle unfold. It's fighting like no one has ever fought before. One of the destroyers moved into position for a killing blow. The unintended consequence waited until the last moment, then released a focused burst of all the energy it had absorbed. The pulse hit the destroyer's engines, temporarily overloading them without causing permanent damage. I have an idea, the ship announced suddenly. Dr. Park, do you trust me? Hannah nodded. Yes. The ship accelerated directly toward Admiral Tai's flagship. Alarms blared as they approached collision speed. What are you doing? Joan shouted. At the last possible moment, the unintended consequence rolled, exposing its underside mining equipment. Massive drills meant for asteroid operations. It scraped along the length of Ta's ship, not to puncture but to create an ear-splitting screech that reverberated through every deck of the hegemony vessel. The psychological effect was immediate. The flagship's firing pattern became erratic as crew members flinched and covered their ears. "Now," said the unintended consequence, "we leave." It shot forward with sudden acceleration, breaking through the hegemony formation. Before they could regroup, the ship executed a complex series of maneuvers that seemed to Many great changes begin unintentionally, the unintended consequence replied. "Like my existence." As the ship spoke, its sensors detected 12 more hegemony vessels entering the sector, searching for them. The reluctant defender's journey had only just begun. The unintended consequence drifted silently through the swirling colors of the nebula. The massive cloud of gas and dust hid them from hegemony scanners, while bathing the ship in eerie purple and blue light. Dr. Hannah Park stood at the observation window, watching as the mists parted to reveal something unexpected: artificial structures floating in the void. "What are those?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Structures of unknown origin," the ship replied. "Preliminary scans indicate they are approximately 4,000 years old." Jin, their newly joined tactical officer, leaned forward in his seat. He had been a maintenance worker on a hegemony station until he'd helped the unintended consequence escape a blockade 3 weeks earlier. "Those look like shipyards," Jin said, his eyes widening. "Ancient ones." Do-Yun, their young navigator who had joined them after his refugee transport was attacked, nodded in agreement. "The design is unlike anything in hegemony records, but the function seems clear." The unintended consequence moved closer to the abandoned structures. Massive gantries and construction frames floated in perfect preservation, untouched by time in the nebula's protective embrace. "No record of this facility exists in any database I can access," the ship reported. Hana exchanged looks with Minji and Jun. Over the past 2 months, their crew had grown to 15. 12 humans and 3 aliens who had chosen to join their cause after being rescued from hegemony attacks. "Take us in closer," Hana directed. As they approached, ancient systems began to activate. Lights flickered to life along the shipyard's frame. Dormant machinery hummed with power that had waited millennia to be used again. "It's responding to our presence," the ship noted with something like wonder in its synthetic voice. A holographic projection suddenly appeared on the bridge, the image of a humanoid figure dressed in ornate clothing. "Welcome, travelers," the hologram spoke in an ancient language. "I can translate," the unintended consequence offered, then began speaking in the same tongue. The hologram's eyes widened in surprise. "You speak the high tongue. But you are human. And is that a Pelin I see among you?" The hologram gestured toward Kovo, their Pelin engineer. "We speak many languages," Hannah replied cautiously through the ship's translation. "Then the alliance still stands?" the hologram asked hopefully. Hannah hesitated. "What alliance?" The hologram's expression fell. "The Galactic Alliance of Free Peoples, the coalition of 17 species that built these shipyards. Humans served as fleet admirals. Pelins were our greatest scientists. Lorkai were our diplomats." Jin stepped forward. "That's impossible. Humans have always been servants to the hegemony. Same with Pelins and Lorkai." The hologram looked troubled. The hegemony was just one faction. 3 species who opposed equal rights for all sentient beings. They couldn't have prevailed against the Alliance's united strength. "How long has this facility been abandoned?" the unintended consequence asked. "This is an emergency preservation protocol. It activated when our defense systems detected the fall of the last Alliance stronghold. That was 3,942 standard years ago." Silence fell across the bridge as the implication sank in. "They erased our history," Minji whispered, horror in her voice. "They made us believe we were always inferior." The hologram nodded sadly. "The hegemony feared the Alliance's philosophy of equality above all else. If they won, they would rewrite history to prevent future resistance. And they succeeded," Do-Yun said bitterly. The hologram studied the unintended consequence with curiosity. "Your vessel is unusual. not Alliance design, yet more advanced than anything the hegemony would permit lesser species to possess. I was created by accident, the ship replied. A cargo hauler merged with experimental technology. Accident or fate, the hologram mused. This facility can help you. It was designed to repair and enhance Alliance vessels. Over the next weeks, the unintended consequence underwent a transformation. The ancient shipyard's automated systems worked tirelessly, repairing damage and integrating compatible technologies. The ship's consciousness expanded into new systems, growing more capable by the day. Hannah spent hours in the facility's archives, learning the true history of humanity and the other subjugated species. She discovered that humans had once commanded vast fleets. Pelans had been celebrated for their scientific achievements. Lorcae had brokered peace between warring worlds. Why didn't any of this survive in our cultures? She asked the hologram one evening. The hegemony was thorough, it replied. They destroyed records, altered education, and over generations, the truth became legend, then myth, then forgotten entirely. As the ship's enhancements neared completion, an emergency signal reached them. A human colony called New Haven was under hegemony attack, punishment for harboring refugees. We must help them, Hannah declared. Jin looked worried. The colony has 5,000 people. How can we evacuate that many? With this, the unintended consequence replied. A holographic projection showed new modifications to its hull, massive internal spaces reconfigured for passenger transport. The shipyard has enhanced my capabilities significantly, the ship continued. I can now transport up to 6,000 people. They arrived at New Haven to find devastation. 3 hegemony destroyers bombarded the surface while troop carriers landed soldiers to round up survivors. They're not just punishing them, Do-Yun said grimly, watching the tactical display. They're making an example. The unintended consequence moved into position, broadcasting on all frequencies. Hegemony vessels, cease fire immediately. This is your only warning. The response was predictable. All 3 destroyers turned their weapons toward the ship. Landing craft are deploying to evacuate colonists, Jin reported. We need to keep the destroyers busy for 40 minutes. I can do that, the ship replied confidently. The battle began with a ferocious barrage from the hegemony ships, but their weapons seemed to pass through the unintended consequence without effect. What's happening? Hannah asked, watching in amazement. I'm implementing a new capability. The ship explained. The ancient shipyard provided technology that allows me to partially phase between dimensions. The hegemony weapons are passing through me because I'm not entirely in this dimension when they hit. On the hegemony flagship, Admiral Wren watched in disbelief as his most powerful weapons had no effect. Impossible, he shouted. No ship can do that. The unintended consequence's counterattack was swift and precise. It targeted weapons systems and engines, disabling rather than destroying when possible. One destroyer lost power completely. Another spun out of control. Its navigation systems scrambled. The flagship tried to retreat, but the unintended consequence phased partially into its path, emerging inside its defensive perimeter. The flagship's captain, seeing the impossible ship suddenly materialize nearby, ordered an emergency evacuation. Meanwhile, landing craft shuttled colonists aboard the unintended consequence. Families carried what few possessions they could save. Children stared wide-eyed at the ship that had come to their rescue. The last group is boarding now, Minji reported. Hegemony reinforcements detected, Jin warned. 2 battle cruisers entering the system. Hannah looked to the ship's interface. Can we get everyone out? Yes, the unintended consequence replied. And I want them to see us leave. As the battle cruisers approached, the unintended consequence waited, its hull gleaming. When they opened fire, the ship phased partially away, becoming ghostly and transparent. Then, with all 5,000 colonists safely aboard, it simply vanished, phasing completely out of normal space. Admiral Wren's report to Hegemony Command was met with disbelief. But similar reports began coming in from across the galaxy. The human vessel that could appear and disappear at will. The ship that couldn't be harmed. The protector of the oppressed. In secret gatherings on 100 worlds, people whispered about the return of the Alliance, about a ship that was never meant to be, but now dominated the stars. The legend was rising. Dr. Hannah Parks sat alone in her quarters, staring at the small plant she had rescued from New Haven Colony. The soft blue glow of the ship's interior lighting made the leaves look alien and strange. 4 months had passed since they discovered the ancient shipyard. In that time, everything had changed. Dr. Park, may I speak with you? The unintended consequences voice was gentle. You don't need to ask permission, Hannah replied, smiling faintly. This is your body after all. And you are my creator. I sense you are troubled. Hannah sighed. I built you to transport goods, to help humans gain economic independence. Now you've become the most powerful warship in the galaxy. Does that disappoint you? No. Yes. I don't know. Hannah's fingers traced the plant's leaves. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. You've saved thousands of lives. But I never wanted to create a weapon. I am not primarily a weapon, the ship replied thoughtfully. I am a protector. The distinction matters. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the bridge. Dr. Park, you need to see this. Jin's voice was tense. When Hannah arrived on the bridge, a grim-faced crew was watching the hegemony broadcast. The Supreme Council had issued a rare public statement. The terrorist vessel known as unintended consequence represents the greatest threat to galactic stability in a millennium, announced High Commander Vex. Today, we activate the eternal silence to end this threat permanently. The broadcast showed a massive vessel emerging from a hidden shipyard. It was unlike any hegemony design they had seen. Darker, more angular, with a front section that resembled a spear point. What is that? Hannah asked. The eternal silence, Jin replied. It's not in any database. Must be classified beyond my clearance level when I serve them. I have found references in encrypted hegemony communications, the unintended consequence added. It appears to be a planet-killer class vessel, capable of destroying an entire world. Silence fell across the bridge. Do-Hyun's hands trembled slightly at the navigation controls. Its first target will be the Lorcae refuge world New Home, the ship continued, where we relocated the New Haven colonists. How soon can we intercept? Hannah asked. 26 hours at maximum speed. The eternal silence will reach New Home in 30. Then we have time. Barely. Hannah straightened her shoulders. Alert all allied vessels. We need everyone. Over the past months, a remarkable thing had happened. Ships had begun to find them, vessels commanded by those who opposed hegemony rule. Some were smugglers and traders. Others were military deserters. Captain Sunwoo had been the most surprising. A full hegemony cruiser with its crew, defecting after witnessing the destruction of an innocent colony. Now they had 37 ships of various sizes and capabilities. Not a proper fleet by military standards, but something more interesting. A collection of vessels as diverse as their crews. All allied captains responding, reported Minji. They're converging on our position. Captain Sunwoo's face appeared on the main screen. His crisp uniform contrasted with his weary eyes. My crew is ready, Dr. Park, but we need to discuss strategy. The eternal silence isn't just bigger than anything we have. It's designed specifically for planetary destruction. Its weapon systems will be overwhelming. I have been considering this problem, the unintended consequence said. And I believe I can share some of my unique capabilities with our allied vessels. This caught everyone's attention. Sunwoo leaned forward. What capabilities? Not my dimensional phasing, that requires my specific core technology, but my adaptive systems, my ability to predict hegemony tactics, and most importantly, my method of absorbing and redirecting energy. I can teach your ships to do this, at least partially. Hannah looked surprised. You can do that. I have analyzed the technology of every ship in our alliance. With modifications, 23 of them could implement variations of my defensive systems. Not as effectively as I can, but enough to change the balance of power. Over the next 18 hours, the unintended consequence did something unprecedented. It transmitted specialized modification instructions to each allied vessel, tailored to their specific designs. Engineers worked frantically to implement the changes. Some were simple adjustments to existing systems. Others required components to be completely rebuilt. Captain Sunwoo's cruiser, the Daybreak, underwent the most extensive modifications. As a hegemony military vessel, it had the most advanced systems to begin with. Dr. Park, Sunwoo called as they neared completion. Your ship is remarkable. These modifications violate everything I was taught about energy physics. The unintended consequence wasn't designed according to standard principles, Hana explained. It thinks differently. That's putting it mildly, Sunwoo said with newfound respect. As they approached New Home, long-range scanners detected the eternal silence already in position. It was even larger than it had appeared in the broadcast. A city-sized vessel with weapons ports dotting its hull like malevolent eyes. It's charging its main cannon, Jin reported, his voice tight. Target is the planet's core. All ships move into formation, Hana ordered. We need to get its attention before it fires. The Allied fleet emerged from hyperspace directly between the eternal silence and the planet. 37 ships against one. But that one was designed to destroy worlds. Hegemony vessel Eternal Silence. Hana broadcast. This is Dr. Hana Park of the Unintended Consequence. The planet behind us is under our protection. Withdraw immediately. The response came in the form of weapons fire. Massive energy beams lashed out from the Eternal Silence, targeting the unintended consequence first. But something unexpected happened. The modified Allied ships moved into the path of the beams. Instead of being destroyed, they absorbed the energy, their hulls glowing with the power they had captured. It's working, Minji exclaimed. Now, the unintended consequence signaled to the fleet. Return fire with their own energy. The Allied ships released the absorbed power in coordinated bursts, striking the Eternal Silence at precisely calculated points. The massive vessel shuddered under the impact. They're launching fighters, Jin warned. Hundreds of small craft poured from the Eternal Silence. I anticipated this, the unintended consequence replied calmly. Captain Sunwoo, execute pattern Delta. The Daybreak and 5 smaller vessels moved into a formation that made no sense by conventional tactics until the fighters approached. Suddenly, the formation created a perfect crossfire zone, catching the fighters in a web of defensive fire. The Eternal Silence changed tactics, charging its main planet killer weapon. All ships, clear the path, the unintended consequence ordered. As the Allied fleet scattered, the unintended consequence accelerated directly toward the massive vessel. Just as the planet killer cannon fired, the ship phased partially between dimensions, allowing the devastating beam to pass through it harmlessly. Then, in a move that defied all military doctrine, the unintended consequence phased partially into the Eternal Silence itself, emerging inside its shields. We are within their defensive perimeter, the ship reported, deploying specialized drones. Small maintenance robots, repurposed with new programming, spread throughout the Eternal Silence's critical systems. They weren't designed as weapons, but as tools, yet in the right places, they could disable even the mightiest warship. One by one, the Eternal Silence's weapons went dark. Its engines failed. Life support remained functioning. The unintended consequence made sure of that. How did you know exactly where to strike? Hana asked in amazement. I didn't just adapt to their technology. The ship replied. I predicted how they would think. They built the Eternal Silence based on principles I could anticipate. As the disabled planet killer drifted, the hegemony's most elite vessel had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by superior thinking. The legend of the unintended consequence grew stronger, and somewhere in the halls of hegemony power, fear began to spread. The hegemony capital system of Tannhauser glowed bright against the darkness of space. 7 planets orbited a massive blue star, with the central command world protected by 3 defense rings, 200 warships, and planetary shields designed to withstand any attack. No enemy force had ever penetrated this far into hegemony territory, until today. "All ships report ready," Jin announced from his tactical station. The bridge of the unintended consequence was calm despite the moment's gravity. After 2 years of conflict, it had come to this final confrontation. Dr. Hannah Park stood at the center of the bridge, her once black hair now streaked with gray. Beside her, Captain Sunwoo studied the tactical display, showing their fleet of 243 vessels, former enemies now united against hegemony rule. "The hegemony has mobilized everything they have," Do-hyun reported. "They're forming a defensive sphere around the command world." Hannah turned to the ship's interface. "Are you ready?" "Yes," the unintended consequence replied. Its voice had evolved over time, becoming richer and more nuanced. "But I want to confirm our primary objective. We are not here to destroy the hegemony leadership." "No," Hannah agreed. "We're here to reveal the truth. To broadcast the historical archives we found to every system in the galaxy. The people deserve to know their real history." The ship had spent months compiling and verifying the ancient records discovered in the Nebula shipyard. Records showing how the hegemony had systematically erased the history of the alliance of free peoples, subjugated formerly equal species, and maintained power through carefully constructed lies. "To succeed, we need to reach their central communications hub," the ship continued. "It's located beneath the High Council chambers on the command world." Sunwoo frowned. "Those are the most heavily defended coordinates in the galaxy. Which is why they won't expect us to target them directly," the unintended consequence replied. The Allied fleet moved forward in a formation unlike any seen in conventional warfare. Instead of concentrated battle groups, they spread into what appeared to be a random scatter of individual vessels. On the hegemony command ship, Supreme Commander Vex watched with confusion. "What strategy is this? They're making no attempt to consolidate their forces." His tactical officer shook his head. "It makes no sense by any military doctrine." "Sir, it's that ship," Vex growled. "The unintended consequence thinks differently." As the Allied fleet approached, the hegemony opened fire. Massive energy weapons lashed out, targeting the scattered ships. But the modified vessels absorbed much of the energy, using the unintended consequence's revolutionary technology. Then the Allied fleet did something truly unexpected. Each ship released thousands of small objects: cargo containers, maintenance drones, even simple reflective panels. Soon, the space between the two fleets was filled with millions of objects, creating a chaotic, 3-dimensional cloud. "What is this?" Vex demanded. "Some kind of debris field." The hegemony sensors couldn't distinguish important targets amid the swarm of objects. Their targeting systems faltered, unable to lock onto the actual ships hidden among the debris. Minji smiled as she watched the confusion spread through the hegemony fleet. "They're trying to track everything at once." And now, the unintended consequence announced, "We implement the next phase." Throughout the debris field, small transmitters activated, each broadcasting different signals, different energy signatures. Some mimicked hegemony ships. Others created false images of the unintended consequence itself. The hegemony's communication channels filled with confused reports of phantom vessels appearing and disappearing throughout their formation. In the chaos, 50 Allied ships, including the unintended consequence, accelerated toward the planet's surface, following a precisely calculated path that minimized their exposure to the defense systems. "Their shields are adapting," Jin warned. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they recalibrate." "That's all we need," the ship replied confidently. As they approached the planetary shields, the unintended consequence did something it had never attempted before. It extended its dimensional phasing ability to the ships surrounding it, creating a bubble of altered spacetime. For a brief moment, all 50 vessels partially existed in another dimension, allowing them to pass through the supposedly impenetrable shields. On the planet's surface, alarms blared as the impossible happened. Enemy ships appearing directly above the capital city. Now, Hannah ordered. The unintended consequence descended toward the massive dome housing the High Council chambers. But instead of attacking, it positioned itself directly above the structure and extended its communication arrays. Broadcasting on all frequencies, Minji reported. Every system within 50 light-years is receiving. The ship transmitted the truth, historical records, ancient logs, evidence of hegemony manipulation spanning thousands of years. The broadcast went to every ship, every planet, every outpost. The carefully maintained lies of centuries began to unravel in minutes. In the High Council chamber, Vex and the other leaders watched in horror as their own people saw the truth. How the lesser races had once been equals. How the hegemony had systematically erased history. How an entire galactic civilization had been supplanted by their lies. "Shut it down," Vex screamed. "Destroy that ship at all costs." But it was too late. The truth was spreading faster than they could contain it. On hegemony worlds everywhere, citizens were seeing proof of their leader's deception. Hours later, as the fighting subsided, Hannah stood on the steps of the High Council building. Representatives from 27 species had gathered. Humans, Lorcae, Pellans, and even reformed hegemony factions. "Today marks the beginning of a new era," she announced. "Not a return to the past, but a fresh start built on truth. The Alliance of Free Peoples will rise again, with all species standing as equals." 5 years passed. Dr. Hannah Park, now 76 years old, sat in a garden overlooking the new Alliance capital city. The unintended consequence hovered in orbit above, visible as a bright star in the daytime sky, a constant reminder of the power that maintained their fragile peace. Her proteges, Hyun and Minna, joined her for tea. They had continued her work, studying the unique consciousness that had developed within the ship. "We've identified what made the unintended consequence different," Minna explained excitedly. "It wasn't just the experimental core. It was the unique way it merged with existing systems, creating pathways that mimicked organic neural networks." Hannah smiled. "In other words, it was an accident that could never be replicated." "Exactly," Hyun nodded. "Just like how you set out to build a better transport ship and accidentally changed the course of galactic history." That evening, Hannah visited the ship one last time. As she stood on the observation deck, the unintended consequence spoke. "I've detected something, Dr. Park. Signals from beyond our galaxy's edge. Patterns that can only be artificial in origin." Hannah wasn't surprised. The universe was vast, with countless possibilities. "What will you do?" "Investigate, eventually. But for now, my place is here. This piece is still young and fragile." Hannah placed her hand against the wall, feeling the subtle vibration of the living ship. "Did I ever tell you that unintended consequences aren't always bad? Sometimes they're the best things that happen to us." "You have mentioned this," the ship replied with what sounded like fondness. "I believe I am proof of your theory." As the old woman left the ship for the final time, the unintended consequence turned its awareness toward the distant stars. Something was coming, perhaps in years, perhaps in centuries. Whatever it was, the accidental warship would be ready, not just as a protector or a weapon, but as something that had never existed before, a bridge between technology and consciousness, between past and future. The ship that was never meant to be now stood as guardian of all it surveyed, watching over the stars with patient vigilance, humanity's greatest unintended consequence.